I think during your tenure, you anticipated, or I guess given the time of about a little over 20 to a little less than 20 years ago, maybe you helped engender the STEM revolution in education by seriously promoting fields like chemistry or even economics to the status that the liberal arts like philosophy or history once held as the pinnacle of the university education. So beyond the obvious rising importance of quantitative knowledge in the form of fields like computer science, are there any other reasons that today or 20 years ago, maybe in a way that's different from 100 or 50 years ago, hard skills are so much more important throughout the academy and that made you want to trigger this shift?
But
I think there are two different strands here. There's one strand which existed long before I had any thoughts about it, which is a kind of two culture strand that goes back to C.P. Snow, and certainly before C.P. Snow, where there's just in intellectual life a kind of double standard. Whereas I used to like to say, if you couldn't name 5 plays by Shakespeare, you'd be embarrassed to admit it. But if you don't understand the difference between exponential and arithmetic growth, or between a chromosome and a gene, you thought it was kind of charming and a subject that could be left to technocratic experts. I never understood the logic of that position, and yet I think it is all too common on college and university campuses, and all too common among those who are designing curriculum. I think there's a different point, which is that there are many ways of understanding human institutions and understanding social interactions. Reading Thucydides and Jane Austen is one of them. Studying data is another one. 100 years ago, there was no data, and there was no systematic capacity to study data on social questions. And so our tool was studying great texts. It doesn't denigrate the study of great texts in any way to point out that we now have new tools, and those new tools make analytical approaches, make modes of study that were previously unavailable to us available. And so it stands to reason that with the development of those new tools, that the balance of what is studied should evolve. And in a way, it's the much more ultimately important and intellectual version of what might be called the Moneyball revolution in professional sports. It used to be that there was no alternative to experienced people with great experience in the sport forming their best judgment based on their experience, looking at different players or making judgments about what the right strategy is. As it became possible to measure large numbers of aspects of performance and to do various kinds of statistical analyses, it came to make sense to also put weight on quantitative approaches. And that's what I think of as going on with respect to a broader range of questions. And it seems to me hard to resist the idea that whatever was appropriate before quantitative analytical methods existed, something different is appropriate once they do exist. And that's not to denigrate other forms of knowledge. It's simply to acknowledge progress that's been made. And I felt that way 20 years ago. And it seems to me everything that has happened since operates to reinforce my beliefs in those directions.
Well, I will ask one more question also about balance in the university. And everything you just said resonates with me. I'm curious, though, to the extent that the university, on your view, is an institution whose, let's say, highest calling is toward the pursuit of truth and wisdom. How do you see the optimal balance between education and research? Because both one involves the dissemination of truth and the training of the world's next thinkers and truth producers. Then the other is the actual producing of truth. How should this dynamic look optimally in a university?
I think there's a lot of evidence that the two go together. I think there's a lot of evidence that the need to teach the next generation is a stimulus to creative thought, that often the best teachers and the best researchers are the same people. And so I think it's natural that there's been a coming together of the education and the research function. I do think that the modern university is strained by differences in balance. If one thinks about the ratio of research that needs to be done on Shakespeare to the need for a next generation to be taught about Shakespeare, it's probably very different than the amount of research that can be done in quantitative genetics that is useful relative to the number of people who need to be taught rigorous quantitative genetics. And so the idea of the university as a universe of scholars, all of whom do substantial teaching and substantial research, I think is under increasing challenge. And I don't think that's just a decay of something wonderful. I think that's a reflection of the forces that are coming from progress. And that's why you're seeing, on the one hand, more and more teaching, more and more roles in leading universities that are dominantly about teaching. And you're seeing more and more roles, on the other hand. Think about the number of biomedical scientists in medical schools who rarely enter classrooms, that are increasingly about research. And I think as one thinks about the university as an institution, this tension is going to be increasingly important going forward. And I think there's probably been some reluctance to face up to it in the spirit of unity. I think there's been a tendency for those who concern themselves with the internal dynamics of universities and with the definitions of core curricula or of what constitutes a liberal arts education to be those who are more in the humanities, perhaps because they are engaged in fewer external pursuits. I used to be struck when I attended a faculty meeting. About a third of the Harvard Arts and Sciences faculty was in the humanities, a third was in the social sciences, and a third was in the hard sciences. That of those who attended, faculty members, perhaps 3/4 were in the humanities. And I think that creates a certain complexity for the definition of liberal education and for the definition of mission in universities going forward. On the other hand, I'm very sympathetic to the argument that there are many places where biology research will be done. Novartis will do it. Pharmaceutical companies will do it. The Massachusetts General Hospital will do it. There are many places where research in the physical sciences will be done. All kinds of military-sponsored institutes will do it. There are many places where research on economic questions will take place. Think of the world central banks and finance ministries, whereas the responsibility to maintain and perpetuate the humanistic tradition is a responsibility that sits more uniquely with universities. And so it's very, very important that in any kind of rush for relevance or connection or immediate impact, that be recognized.